We're getting ready for this weekend's Seattle Appraisal Fair with a look back at the last one we did when we were in Florida.
One of the really interesting things to me about doing appraisal fairs, some of these things are in collections that have just not come out in years, and some of them will go into collections and not be seen. Well,
let me know if you're filming me.
Yeah, I am. You look great. This is a really beautiful piece. From your grandmother?
Yes.
Yeah, that's nice. Do you know if the clock works?
I don't think it does. I've never tried it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't hear it ticking. I think the clock would need repair. Again, European porcelain. Look at the beautiful painting in the eyes and the great detail. I would say possibly check, because again, I think of this as being related to amphora, and I would say that the date is going to be right about, looking at the clock face with the beveling and everything, since it doesn't give us other clues, we have to look at those sorts of clues. I would say this is right around 1900, 1910, once again.
Okay.
And she's just really lovely. These clocks can be hard to repair, but it does wind. It doesn't sound like anything is broken, so it might be worth your while. She might actually be worth a little more, honestly, if she was running maybe 175, 195, 110, somewhere with not in working order. Okay, so tell me how you got this piece.
I bought that at the auction house where I work.
Oh, where do you work?
I work for Antique Marketplace at Belleair Auctions.
Oh, yes.
And I bought that, and I'm a dealer, but I don't know much about Asian at all.
Right.
They had said it was an Amari charger.
Yes. Well, it definitely is. It's definitely Amari Japan. It's all hand painted. It's not transfer, which is nice. The first thing that I would like to do, were you hanging this on a wall?
No, that's the way it came.
Okay. The first thing I would like to do is encourage you to take this off. Could we do that now?
Sure.
These things are the worst thing to hang anything on. I understand why people do this, and this was done a long time ago. They actually fashioned their own, and they were smart to at least pad it, because the padding keeps it a little bit from chipping the edges, but just the tension of these metal things are enough to sometimes damage it. So this is one of the things about old labels on the back of stuff. Sometimes they're accurate, and sometimes they're not.
Well, I took it off.
But it is a really neat piece, and it is earlier Amari, where Amari, typically we see this red and this blue, but I do believe it's Meiji period, which I believe starts in 1868. So it does have considerable age. Part of the way we can tell that is we look at the back and the way that it's finished, and we see a lot of little spots in the back. They tried to be very careful about the front not having those, but a lot of things were wood-fired back then, and wood embers would sometimes pop and get into the glaze, and that's one way to tell a 19th century piece from a 20th century piece. Now, indeed, there is a little bit of a divot where they had that stand. It did do a little bit of damage, but it is very, very minor, so I think it's good we took that off. This is such a big showy piece. Do you mind me asking what you paid for it at auction?
$28.
$28. Well, I'd say you did just fine. Strictly as a decorative object, if it was 20th century, I would think it might be $100 or $150 because it has good size. Because it's really an old piece, I think your value is probably more in the maybe the $300 to $350 range now. So you got a very good deal for $28. Well, it's a balanced scale, places for all the weights, and all the pieces are there. And that's the important part, is that all the weights be there, because these little weights would get lost and gone. This is a fairly small one, so this would have been likely for measuring medicines, for example, that sort of thing. And each piece on it is going to have a mark that tells the weight. And then you, of course, balance on one side. And then you put your object in the other side, and that's how you know if it's in balance, you know your weight.
Any marks other than on the weights themselves?
Right, let's take a look at that and see if we get a little bit of an idea from the way the turnings are made, and I'm going to look at the marks on here. Okay, it's in grams, which is what I expected, so we know it was not from the United States, because this is metric. Then with brass, we like to look at the way it's finished. A later 20th century piece will typically have file marks or some evidence of being a little bit rough. I believe this is earlier 20th century. There is a space where a mark could have been applied to the bottom. It does have wear. It's finished nicely. From the way the turnings are done, my sense is that it is either English or that it was made in India for the English market. I would say that it's likely to be sometime maybe before the Second World War, but probably not before the turn of the 20th century. There was a period of time where there was a lot of interest, like in the 1920s, in scientific development, and so people would have them just because it was an interesting thing to have in your den or your office.
Right.
My sense for a value on this is probably in the, I would say maybe $100 to $125 would be a retail value on this piece. With your permission, may I take it out? Because I'll tell you the reason I have to is, and I'm going to use my cotton gloves for this. I know some appraisers use cotton gloves all the time, even when they shop in the Goodwill. I am not quite as fussy as that. I look at the object and figure what makes sense, and especially when they're not being handled often. But in this case, I'll use the gloves because this is, there's a lot of good information on this. And it is, okay, here we go. And it says that it is Hiroshiga. And Hiroshiga was the probably most famous early artist in ukiyo-e, which is this style of Japanese art, and this does indeed look like an early piece. It's rather thin.
It's very fragile.
Yes, they are very fragile. We're going to go ahead and take this out very carefully. When Japan opened to the West, ukiyo-e had been a form of art that was late 18th, early 19th century. And when Westerners first came, they thought of it as being sort of cartoonish, and they didn't really take it very seriously, but it was taken very seriously in Japan. What's happened recently is that because of anime and because of our exposure to that sort of drawing, there is now a different idea about these pieces, and it's actually very collectible and sought after now. If we could tell that it was absolutely from his hand and was period back then, this could be worth thousands and thousands of dollars. My sense looking at it is that it is done in his style, probably not done by him, but probably done sometime in the late 19th century. And I'm going to go ahead and very gently roll it back
So
up.
you don't think it is this artist?
Oh, I think it's this artist. I just think this artist was so famous and popular in Japan that they continued to do his work after he passed. He died in 1858, but the work was so popular that it's still being produced today.
Where do you think I ought to go with this?
Well, I still think it's very good, and I still think that since you're doing this as a fundraiser, I would actually take it to an auction house here. Probably a late 19th century piece. Even at that, it could still be worth potentially $300 to $500.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the place to sell it, and have them look, and because they're going to have an expert on staff who may be even more knowledgeable about it and be able to tell you more.
We came last year. You appraised
Yes.
some of our things. So
Yes, I remember. It was fun.
This has been in my family since before I was born.
This is neat. You know, we see a lot of trays. There's a lot of interest and use for them starting in the 20s, really, because that's when you start to have coffee tables and cocktail sets and all that kind of thing. Of course, we're not supposed to say it was in the 20s because that was prohibition, but that's, we all know what was really happening.
Yeah.
But this one is late 40s, early 50s, and it's interesting because it's the Lifetime handmade picture tray. And the reason they called it Lifetime is that it's on masonite, and it's just printed, but it's like almost like a lacquer finish, with the idea that you could wash it off and it wouldn't mess it up unless you did it over and over. It says the illustration under the glass, and it's funny they refer to it as glass because it really isn't glass. It's a glass-like finish. Yeah, it's a glass-like finish. A perfect reproduction of an original oil by W.J. Willarding. And he was a pretty famous wildlife artist, and actually was contemporary at the time, about 1950.
Yep.
And it's just really cool. We don't see many of these because people would damage them. They'd leave the stuff on them too long. It would eventually, alcohol would mess up the finish if you spilled it on it. So they were lifetime, but not a lifetime guarantee. I think it's really cool. I usually would sell something like this probably in the $40 range.
I've got a few hundred records here from Disney.
Oh, this is the turntable.
Right. And last time I plugged it in, the turntable still turned, but the belt is loose. I mean, it doesn't. I put a record on it and it doesn't fall.
The belts can be replaced, and if you were to want to play this, or if you were to sell it or something, you would probably want to do that.
Yeah.
This is great because this is they did a lot of Mickey Mouse record players in the 1960s, and they're all plastic. This is the very, very, very first one when the Mickey Mouse Club was brand new on television, which I think was 1955.
I was like 3 years old. Mom got it for me.
The belt notwithstanding, it's in pretty remarkably good condition. It seems like it's still got its needle. The plug is good. The fact that it turns, again, belts can be replaced. The other stuff is the hard stuff. It's in wonderful condition, and we don't see this model much at all. We see the plastic ones, and the plastic ones actually are selling for $75 and $85 now. This one, if you, and this is the right place to sell it. If I had this at the antique show at Mount Dora, for example, where we get a lot of Disney collectors, I might price this as high as $150.
Yeah.
Because they're just that hard to find, especially because it was cardboard. They were made for kids. They get wet. You kept it in really good shape. It's not really particularly scuffed up or
I used it
torn.
every day when I was little till I was 10, 12, something like that.
And then you have the rest of the collection. Certain ones, Rocket to the Moon is a really particularly hard one to find. Now a lot of these sell for $2 and $3 a piece, or $4 and $5, but you're absolutely right, because you have so many of the early ones and you have some good titles in here. Some of them can go really high. This is a good one, Blue Tail Fly, because you have a black memorabilia interest with that one, and I think this one, it might be a $50 record potentially. Most people look at these old kids records and just figure, oh, they're really not worth very much, because a lot of them aren't, but that's true of vinyl in general. Most records are worth $2 or $3, except for the ones that are worth $200 and $300. When you start getting into Western scenes, so you've got Wild Bill Hickok, this one's going to be worth more.
And there's Roy Rogers.
You've got Roy Rogers in here. That's a good one. It's a pretty fun and interesting collection. You would have to go through piece by piece. This is a little different thing. This is Vogue Picture Disc. Tom Safdie in Detroit came up with this idea right after the war. You sandwich the thing in, and then the picture is a lot of the attraction. Around $35 is a pretty typical selling price for these now. It's a great collection. I mean, conservatively, without going through and evaluating everyone, it looks like you probably have maybe 200 to 300 records, a couple $1,000 for the collection. I think by the time you added it all up, $1,500 to $2,000, just off the top of my head with what I've seen as a sample, would be a possibility, and they're just great. Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm still kicking.
Good. Oh, isn't this nice?
I got it from my mother. She was a collector.
Well, this is a very nice piece that she had. This is an interesting shade because you notice it's almost like a black. This is mulberry ware, and this is going to be, it's like a purpley black. And this is transfer ware, and this is from Staffordshire, England. And this is a pretty early Staffordshire piece, yes. The pattern is Korean on the back, it says. And it's interesting, the spelling, C-O-R-E-A-N. And the company is FW&P. It is one of the Staffordshire companies that was active in the mid-1800s and went out of business before the turn of the 20th century. So this piece is somewhere in the 1840s to 1860s era in terms of age. Older than all of us are, yes. This is a true antique and then some. And these pieces, it's got a lot of crackling, but that actually is not unusual, and the overall condition is very good because it doesn't have any chips or cracks. But back then, they were still learning how to make this stuff, and so the vitrified top glaze that they would put, the clear glaze over the transfer pattern, would actually sometimes cool down at a different rate, and over time you get the crackling between the two. It does not affect the value. It's just something that was part of the process back then. It almost flows a little bit like Flow Blue because the heat from the overglaze would sometimes melt the decal a little, and that's why design is not more clear. But that's actually probably why it ended up in the United States, because in England they would have considered this a factory second. And so what they did is they sent all of it to the US.
Really?
And American collectors really like that about it, because that's what we're used to, because that's what we got. And the English have no use for it. They never liked it because they didn't consider it to be perfect. Younger collectors are starting to like Victorian ware again. And so we're just starting to see more interest in this. I believe the value on this piece right now is probably in the $125 range. There was a time it might have sold for as much as $175 to $195. I wouldn't be surprised, should we all live long enough, if it doesn't get back to those levels, because there are people interested in this, and the important thing is that the condition is good. Oh, I like this too. And was this from her collection or your collection?
Oh, from her collection.
It's in great shape and it's a really good color. As enamelware goes, this is a pretty early piece, and this was, it's metal with an enamel coating. And that was so that it wouldn't rust out, and so that they could make it. They were fairly inexpensive at the time. But this one it's got a few nice features. The spout here has the sieve in it so that you don't get particles in. The top has a nice little crimping around the top, and it's a tin lid. You can tell that it is old because the inside has lots of silver sort of looking still, because it didn't get as much air, and the outside is oxidized with age. And I like the handle attachment too, because it's got this little place for your thumb. And part of the reason for this is a lot of times they would put them over a fire or a stove, for example, to heat them. And when you took it off the stove, it would be very hot and you could burn your hand. But this would actually give it a little bit of insulation so that you wouldn't burn your thumb when you were pouring. And you also notice the handle is finished differently, and that's because it's a little thicker so that it doesn't transmit the heat as much. So they were very thoughtful about the way they made these. And what's remarkable about this one, we always think of these as being very heavy. This one's actually fairly light. The early ones were. It's got a little bit of design. The color is the cobalt. This is a desirable color that's hard to find. And the condition is just really, really immaculate. So date on this is somewhere around 1890. I would expect in the right place, this might sell for, again, 135 to 150. Come on up. Good. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you.
How did you get this, and have you ever been told anything about it?
It was my mother's.
Interestingly enough, my mother had a battle axe too.
Yeah.
From the decoration and the way it's made, it is handmade, and it's, I would expect that this was actually from Southeast Asia.
She just kind of hung it around so that if she woke up and somebody was attacking, she could, I don't know.
My mom would point at ours every time we were bad and say, I know how to use that thing. She didn't really. It's an interesting looking piece. It's a cool looking piece, and it has some value. But this piece was actually intended to be decorative right from the start. This was not something that somebody actually would have used in battle, and there's a few reasons we can say that. First of all, when you look at this edge, it's not sharp at all. So, and it doesn't feel as if it ever was sharpened to the point where it would have been able to actually cut something. There was a period of time, and it seems to have been first starting maybe in the early 1900s and then again in the 1950s. My mother's was 1950s. I think yours is older. They look very old because they're all handmade, but the parts of the world where they were doing these sorts of things were handmade really up until the middle of the 20th century. If you look at the handle, it doesn't have any wear at all. The end is not worn. There's nothing that indicates that this was ever held or used in any way. Because if you were using this, even if you were just using it as a machete, which they do carry machetes in a lot of cultures because that's something they take to work, you would expect that there would be a little bit of wear where this was held and used and swung, and it wouldn't be a uniform, perfect color on everything. So it's a neat looking piece, but I believe that it is a decorative piece from the early 1900s, probably sold to tourists. And so for that reason, it has value because it's a neat looking thing. I still think it might be worth $100 to the right person. Now, the other piece you have is interesting to me, and we're going to be careful because I know the cover is loose. So this is the Holy Bible, the Pronouncing Parallel Bible. These were very popular. It's got the old and new versions in parallel columns. So what they're saying is, here's one version of the Bible, and then next to it, we're printing a more modern version of the Bible, partly because it makes it easier to read, but also because for scholars of the Bible, it tells you how things, we talk, for example, there's the King James version of the Bible. Well, why do they call it that? Because King James had the Bible rewritten into English. And when he had the Bible rewritten into English, he added a few things because he wanted to have a little bit of social control, because King James was coming into the monarchy shortly after there had been the Cromwell Revolution, where they overthrew the monarchy for a period of time. So that's part of the reason for the parallel Bible, is so that you can study the differences and interpret what the original intent of the Bible was. You could have it rebound. There was a time that I would have told you, well, it's neat, it's a nice old Bible, it's not worth doing that. That time was 25 years ago. Now there's a lot of interest in these Bibles, and they do have value. Was this a family piece?
It was an ant.
An ants. Okay, I'm going to be very delicate with it. There's wonderful engravings and great illustrations throughout. So this was a very fancy one. And if you notice again, because it's the parallel version, history of the books of the Holy Bible. So they're not just talking, it's not just the Bible, they're actually talking about, well, Zechariah was the 11th in the order of the 12 minor prophets, and of his personal history we know very little, and then they go to great lengths to talk about the people who wrote the Bible. So it was really very scholarly. These are pretty typically from the 19th century. Then in the middle you have color plates. So this was meant for somebody who is a serious Bible scholar. The value of this in this condition is probably around $125. If you have it professionally restored, which may take some money, but I think if you're interested in keeping it as a family piece, it would be worthwhile. It could be worth as much as $200 to $250, because there really is a lot of interest in these now.
Super. Investment in it.
Right, it just was found in a house. And that happens so often. I'm amazed how many people say, oh, I just was there and here they had these things. Let's start with this, because this is the Audubon Folio. And what's nice about this is that it actually has reproductions of all the Audubon pieces. This would have been done probably around the 1950s, but they're very faithful. Like, here is our wonderful flamingo. I just love this guy, yes.
My favorite.
And of course, we're in Florida, so we've got to show the pelican as well. I just love this stuff. It looks like they have all 30 of the pieces. They did make a lot of these because it was very popular in the early 60s, the way it's done. Yes, 1964, Audubon in the Atomic Age, so definitely of the 60s. Because it's not the original prints, it's not going to have the high value of the originals where they might be worth $100 or $200 a piece, but they're in beautiful condition and they'd be frameable. And so there's this issue of, is it worth more dead than alive? I would like to see it stay together, because, and I'm glad you do too, I agree with you. But some people would take them and frame them and sell them individually. And if you think of it in that context, conservatively $150 would be the value on that. Lionel Barrymore, of course, was very famous for other reasons, and he got really interested in doing artwork and etchings and engravings when he was older. And they started to print them. And then they turn them, as they're calling them here, into dinner mats. So you have a few of the, you have a few engravings in here, and then these are turned into these to use on your table. They're really fun. They were fairly common. Interestingly enough, Vincent Price, of all people, was hired to be the spokesman for Sears, where they sold these things. And there's a lot of them out there. They're just fun. I mean, they sell for about $15 for something like that. So have something that looks like it's from the Gibson Girl era here. This is a Charles Gibson out of a magazine at the time. It might not be worth your while to frame, but for somebody to buy these and frame these are out of Collier's and various things. And they're really neat, and they show the fashions of the era, and people just like that. This one is neat because they're playing cards with the parents, and the dad looks very disapproving, and the quarters are very distracted. Fun collection, and you know, it's just great. I love seeing people rescue things.
Yeah.
If this was sitting in a house that
Trash bag.
it was in a trash bag, wow, that's awesome. How did you get this piece?
That was my father's.
Aw, how nice.
And oh yes, he had lots of paintings he did himself as well as collected antiques.
Oh,
And I know it's damaged. There's a little.
it does have one little tear. But it's really very soulful. And did he ever tell you anything about how he got it? He just, okay. And you did notice that the artist's signature is on the back rather than the front.
I did notice that, but
Yes.
I wasn't sure if that was the place, like a museum, or I never saw a stamp like that.
Yes, well, let's take a look at it with the loop really quickly. It's Henderson.
It's Henderson.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
I could not read that.
Yeah, it's Henderson. It's dated 1856. I cannot say that I know this artist as a listed artist. Portrait artists would often go to an area and they were itinerant. They would go to a certain town. They would go to the wealthy people in the town. They would go to the merchant class. They would go to the government class, and they would say, I'm in town and I'm painting portraits. And some of them were very, very, very talented, and some are listed and known and have value for their name. They would be there for a certain period of time. They would paint everybody in town who had the money to have a painting done, and then they would move on to the next town.
So it could take days for each person, or
Absolutely. The person would probably have to sit every day for a number of days, have their portrait painted. And because this is 1856, this is right before photography, ambrotypes and daguerreotypes and things are just starting to develop, but they're smaller format and not everybody had access to them, and they're not large like this, and so portraiture was still a big deal. The next thing we do is we look at the way she's dressed to see if there are any clues as to what her position in life was. And I would say that she was probably married to someone of some note in the town. If they're holding a book, they're generally an educator of some sort, or at least it indicates that they had education and were literate. Lacework on the edges indicates that she had some money because lace was an expensive thing to have done for you at the time. When I look at the eyes seem to be painted well. It's very painterly. It's also very dark, and if you don't mind, I'm going to step into the sunlight for just a moment with it. When I take it into the sunlight, one thing that is hard to see in this shadow is that she's sitting on a red divan. It's a maroon color that goes around here, and you can't really see it.
it's coming to life now.
More interesting the more you look at portraits. A lot of homes were heated with coal, and coal would darken things. Just age and oxidation will sometimes darken things. If it turned out to be valuable enough, which I'm not sure it will, but you could have a conservator take it and they would lighten it up a little. It has a lot of craquelure. Yes, just because of age and just the way the paint takes. Also because homes didn't have climate control. There's been some restoration to the inner frame, and then it was put in another frame at another time.
Okay.
So this part is the original frame, and then it was set in another frame at a later time. I imagine you're keeping it because it sounds like it's a family thing. Not necessarily. Okay. It's not a family member or someone that's
Correct.
personal to you.
Yes.
I would say that in the current market, if you're just going to sell it and we don't know anything more and the artist is not important, which is probably likely, $300 to $400 range is the retail price. Oh yes, Mikimoto pearls. Very nice. And they're matched rather than graduated. How did you get this set?
This was my mother's, and she cherished her pearls.
Oh yes.
On in the Caribbean, I believe, when she went on a cruise. We're talking many, many years ago.
We're going to take a look at the earrings and see if they are related or not. I doubt it too. They're nice, but I don't think they're the same. I know it might seem strange I'm putting it to my cheek, but variations in temperature are a way. Everybody wants to rub pearls on their teeth. Your hands get callous, so it's hard to tell that way. Put this up to your cheek and feel that, and then do the same with the earring and tell me which one feels cold to you. The pearls are colder. As you hold them there, your skin temperature will tell you, and the reason for that is that these are real. Earrings are probably worth somewhere in the $25 to $30 range. Now, the pearls, on the other hand, are not as valuable as they used to be, but Mikimoto is the name you want. The Mikimoto pearls, they were very good in the 1950s when pearls became really popular, marketing themselves and talking about the quality of the pearl, and they actually were a little better than the other pearls that came from Japan. The parasite will kill the oyster unless it forms the pearl around it, and so the longer they let it go, the larger the pearl gets, but also the denser the layers. And a lot of the pearl companies, particularly in Japan, that were copying Mikimoto, would be in a big hurry because they just wanted it to look right. And so you'd get them home and pretty soon they would peel and the layers would come off. Mikimoto was better quality because they took more time. Because of the name and that they have the original box, these days I would say the value is probably in the $150 range for insurance. The market is not great right now. Retail on this is probably about half of that. The clasp has a pearl in it too, and women's hair was shorter then. You can date pearls oftentimes by whether the clasp has decoration in the back or if it's just plain. In the 1970s when hair was long, they didn't bother decorating the back because you didn't see it.
My friend Darlene.
Oh, well, hello, Darlene, and thank you. And thanks for bringing this. What a wonderful piece this is. So how did you get this?
It was my mother's, and I think she bought it at an antique shop.
It's very sweet. We have the lute player in his garb. Material looks bronzish, but it's actually spelter, which is a way to make things look like bronze that are made out of a lighter or an alloy metal, generally a combination of tin, possibly lead, other metals like that. But the reason for that was because it was easy to mold, and they could do a stamping in it, a metal stamping, and get these very elaborate bases. The base looks sort of Asian, doesn't it? And the reason for that is because it was very popular in the 1920s to take Asian vases and put them on bases like this and turn them into lamps. They would drill the bottom. They actually ruined a lot of period vases back then, not knowing better. Then when figural lamps like this became very popular in the 1920s and 30s, a lot of times they would keep that same sort of Asian-looking motif on the bottom, even though it doesn't really match the rest of the lamp. This is going to date to sometime around 1930. And you can tell that also by the Art Deco style of the amber shade. All of this is original to this piece. There has been great interest in Art Deco lamps for probably the last 30 years in collecting. And there's starting to be more interest in Art Deco design in general now. There's a new generation because in the 1980s, Art Deco became popular to collect. A lot of 1980s designs had an Art Deco feel. And now we have 30 and 40-year-olds who were children then who remember those designs, and then they're finding out that it harkens back to the 1920s and 30s, so now they're interested in this too. So the timing to have a piece like this is very good. I would say the value of this in a retail store like this one would probably be in the $350 range today. So it's a very nice, substantial piece, and I think it's quite handsome, and she got a nice thing.
Okay.
And I'm glad it stayed with you.
It's not going to tell you on the internet when you try to look for it.
Oh, no, of course not. No, this is something real because this is Carter Hall Trophy Race.
This is from Ames Motor Speedway,
Okay.
which is now Talladega,
Right.
which was Alabama International Speedway at the time. This is the winner's circle flag for the Rebel Corvette, which sold on Barrett Jackson for $2.86 million. I got it from the family, so I know it's authentic, as you can see.
Oh,
I don't have to tell you.
no, it's clearly authentic. There's no
This
question
was the
of that.
first race that they allowed for the Gran Turismo for Corvette to actually run in,
Oh, really?
and they took first place.
Values on these are should be really high, and the thing is the person who bought the car is
Should have
probably the person who should have this exactly.
The person I got it from was a nephew of the mechanic that built the car. So this came out of the mechanic's house directly from the family, which I have pictures with, to back all the stuff. I don't have that stuff with me.
And
But
I mean, this
Barrett
is
Jackson didn't want to give me the information of who bought the car, and so I wanted this flag to be with the car, correct? And I believe it should be.
I believe it should be too.
The Hall of Fame has begged me for it, but I just I
Well,
want to give it up to him like that.
you're right. It is a little hard to put a value on because it's not, it is unique. There is one, this is it. I have no doubt about the authenticity of it, not just because of what you're saying, but also you can look at the way it's made. You can look at the way that it's got age in the right places. It's clearly not a reproduction in any way. The only way to really value something like this when there's only one of them is to try to find something that is as comparable to a story like that in the racing world.
You actually knew more than I thought you would. It's very impressive.
Well, I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. And of course, what I don't know is exactly where we would find a good comp for this. But conservatively, because of the story, fair market value, I would think we might be looking at low five figures like 10,000, 12,000. So, if anyone is out there who happens to know the classic car market on a high end, please reach out with a comment. And we will try to link this back to the place that it should go. I see why you didn't want to bring this up. Oh, this is the pewter you told me about. Yes. Okay.
My husband was commissioner in the city of Clearwater for a couple years, and I think they granted to him.
Ah, very nice. Okay, let's see. Well, there looks like a bunch of different pieces. I noticed this one has the Wilton mark on the bottom. Oh, wow. Very extensive collection.
Yes.
And this one says Wilton, Columbia. That's 1971 date on there. This one has hallmarks around the top that are USA as well.
Yeah, and look at this one. You see, Commission Nunamaker, City of Clearwater, 1977, 1980.
Oh, that's nice. Okay, this one is a shaker. Yeah, you have a lot that's the Wilton Armatail, and that makes sense because of the era this was done. So pewter originally really first started in England, and these were some of the first things that people had when they stopped using wood for dishes. Pewter was one of the first things that was made instead because it lasted longer, and you didn't have to carve a piece of wood to be able to have your food. And so in the 1780s and 90s, it was very widespread use. And then around 1910, when there was interest in the colonial era, people started making and collecting pewter again. And so a lot of those old pieces went into collections. And then in the 70s, there started to be interest in pewter a third time, and that's when most of your pieces are from. I don't see anything that looks like it's really, really old. It all looks like it's probably about 50 years old. I think there's just starting to be interest in it again, and there's your maker mark on there. I think that your basic pieces, you're probably looking at around $10 or $15 per piece, and I would say you might have probably in the $200 to $300 range for the collection. I wish I could tell you it was worth more, but it's not the really old stuff that some of the stuff from the 1700s might be worth that much per item. Unfortunately, and I'll show you how you can tell so that you don't have this happen again. It looks old. It's got the Art Deco. They definitely did some Art Deco that looked like that. It's a little not super crisp, but here's the thing actually that's the telltale is these screws that are holding it together, and they didn't make that kind. I mean, that sort of looks like a Phillips, but that screw pattern, they weren't doing that back when a bench like this would have been made. So what it is a cool, probably 1980s revival piece, and then somebody just sat it outside and had it on their porch, so it looks really old and really decayed, like it would be the era that you would think would be as old as what it looks like, but it's just because they didn't take good care of it.
You are like the antique god.
Aw.
You are.
Oh, well, that's awfully nice. You know, it's funny. We know what we know, and then a guy just brought something that's one of a kind that we have no idea how to evaluate. So, you know, we all learn together.
Yes.
It's great fun. I just love it.
You know, I love this community. I've been doing this since 1989, off and on.
Me too. He's cute.
I love him.
Yeah.
And my grandmother had him for years, but to be honest, I don't know anything about him.
Okay, well, let's take a
number,
look.
I think on the bottom.
He's got glass eyes. It's a good ceramic. It's European. And I'm Don't think I can tell you exactly who made it, but it's good quality. It appears to be a porcelain, and I would say from the way that the number is done, leaning towards Czechoslovakia or middle of Europe.
That's what my sister said.
Really?
I think it's Czech.
I think so too.
And I was like, what makes you think that? And she said because of the finish.
The finish.
Something about the finish.
The finish, the quality, it almost has the look of amphora ware. Amphora was very popular around 1900. I mean, I think this piece is a little later, but it is a nice quality porcelain. Often these colors are typical of their ware, and the designs tend to be very crisp and very detailed like this. So I feel like it might be related to one of those factories. The fact that it has the dot after the number is something I've noticed that is typical of Central European countries. And that may be as much as I can tell you, though, but it's got glass eyes and it's just really nice. I think it's 20th century rather than 19th. It surprises me in a way that it doesn't have a mark. I don't think it's royal ducks, but it definitely feels like that quality, and I do feel it's that part of the world. Owls are popular now. This is good quality. I mean, $100 retail. It's a Maluka lamp, and they were made in Italy, and I think the design came out in around, gosh, the price that you saw. Oh, there we go. Yeah, you brought it up again. I'm just curious to see. Well, that has to be an opening auction price or something, because okay, very good, because yeah, that would we would buy them by the gross at that price if we could find them. $950. That seems to be about where they're going, I think, these days, and they're just fantastic. It's such a great design, and the fact that you can really focus the light where you want. I mean, it was really. It's something that was made where the form really does follow the function.
That's exactly where I am.
It's just really neat the way that it folds down to nothing. Yep. Yeah, this is a Sonneman lamp, and of course he was way ahead of his time too. I'm used to seeing his chrome lamps more than anything. I'm going to go ahead and carefully hold this at the bottom so we can see. Yep, it's got the Robert Sonneman for George Kovacs. This one is one of my favorites, and this one actually is.
I found it called the what's it called? The feather? It's called the feather.
Yeah, the feather tack lamp, yep.
It's been a favorite. It's been on my desk. And this one with the LED bulb I put in is...
because you could put LED in these. Well, and also this came out in the 80s, a little bit after this one. And so there was a little more experience with, we need more light, but we like this look. And the funny thing about these is that once in a while, especially here in Florida, you will sometimes see these for a song at estate sales, because they just think it's something somebody got at IKEA. They just think they don't realize, if they don't pick up the bottom and see the tag and they haven't actually seen these before, they don't realize how good these really are. I think the first one we looked at is a little more valuable on the market currently, but I'm seeing $650 and $750 on these when I'm seeing them, and I think that's a selling price.
That's fair. I'm not looking to make a fortune on them. The biggest thing for me is they get passed on to someone who appreciates them.
Exactly, and who understands that just because this has plastic switch buttons and is from the 80s, that it doesn't mean that it isn't something, because these really are something, and they're something very, very good, and the people who are in the know that. Now, this morning you had a price on this.
I had 89.
And you had 89, and I looked at it and thought, right now in the market the way it is, again, I think your price is just right, and the reason is that this is green depression glass, and they are hot for green depression glass because it glows under a black light, and this is an unusual piece because it was a kitchen piece. It's not exactly a store display. It would be something you would have taken home, but this was a rather large size for that. And so, and this is 1930s, and I like that it's Diamond T of Brooklyn, New York. And you've got the original label, and the labels are usually missing, so it makes it more appealing in a whole lot of ways. And so it's just the right piece at the right time, and honestly, again, I think your price is exactly right. If I had it, I would price it between $85 and $95.
Okay, thank you so much. I just wanted to be sure.
Well, let's start with the ring. How did you get this piece?
That wasn't mine.
Your mother's, okay. Did she ever talk about it?
No.
No, I don't know anything about my jewelry.
All right, well, we'll take a look first of all to see if there's any hallmarks, and there is. It appears to be a yellow topaz, and it says that it's marked 14 karat. I don't have a gold tester to test that,
It is. I know.
but you know it is. I am looking at the stone. I would say this piece is probably about 45 or 50 years old, looking at the setting. It's prong set. It does have a little bit of wear to the stone. Topaz will wear with use, especially with a big emerald cut where there's a flat surface, so that seems consistent. And because it's 14 karat, a lot of the value is in the setting. A retail price might be in the $325, $350 range, and an insurance value might be closer to $500 on a piece like that.
My great uncle gave this to me from World War II when he fought. It was
Yep.
his. And it's in pretty good shape, and the paper inside.
So he was a medic during the war, and this is the first aid box. That is really neat.
Yeah.
And it's in great shape. It's not rusted. A lot of these sold at Army surplus, and people just used them until they were gone and then threw them away. And yes, it's got all the information here. They were made by this company out of Massachusetts, you see in here, and they originally would have had all these things, tourniquets and safety pins and all that. Every so often, people will find one with all this stuff in it. So at some point, the Army redesignated it. So that tells us this is towards the end of the war, like 1944, 45. These have some value. I usually see prices around $50 on these without the stuff in them.
Yeah.
More if it has it.
Okay.
But it's a great story. This is really fun and interesting to me. I really like this. These were framed up in probably the 1970s when they were finding things, and it was 200 years old then. So that's impressive. How did you get it?
A friend of mine had it. His father had it.
Oh, it was from a friend of yours. Okay. Yes. Well, they're watch cocks to protect the innards of the watch. And they're brass, and they would have to make all of this by hand, so they're all different, of course. Watches from this era can be thousands of dollars now, so even parts from them are of some value. And I would say you could probably tell your friend maybe $100 to $125 for this piece would be my estimate. Oh, this is interesting. And this is a Rosenthal piece. That is neat. I mean, I think of Rosenthal as China, but they make all sorts of things now, and they have a modernist studio line that's very popular. I really like it. It's a good quality company. Do you mind me asking, was this part of an auction lot, or do you know what you paid for it?
I think it was a garage sale, actually.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's a good piece, and because of who made it and the fact that they have the original sculptor's name on it, and it's a horse and people like horses, I would probably put $125 or $135, somewhere in there. Well, we sure had a lot of fun, and we got to see a lot of really fun things, interesting things, and some one-of-a-kind stuff that we will never see again. So I hope you enjoyed getting to see this cool stuff like I did, and we'll do this again soon. If you enjoyed this video, check out this one. Also, click thumbs up to like this video, and check the description for information about our Patreon, our memberships. We've got a lot of different levels with different perks and bonus videos and early content. Also, please do check out our website, theantiquenomad.com, for appraisal help, and we'll see you again for more adventures in the antique and vintage community soon. Bye for now.